The greatest weapon against stress, William James once wrote, is our ability to choose one thought over another. But what happens when the pain runs so deep that choosing seems impossible? What happens when the body aches, or the mind breaks, or grief arrives without warning and without mercy? James did not look away from these questions. He walked directly into them, and what he found there changed the way we understand human suffering. Pain, in James's view, was not an anomaly. It was woven into the fabric of conscious life. In the Principles of Psychology, published in 1890, he examined sensation with extraordinary care, arguing that all experience, including painful experience, arrives in a continuous stream. Pain is not a break in the stream. It is part of it. And because it is part of the stream, it is subject to the same forces that shape all experience: attention, interpretation, memory, and will. This matters enormously. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what James intuited, that the experience of pain is not simply a fixed input from the body to the brain, but a construction. Two people with identical injuries can experience radically different levels of suffering depending on what they believe about the pain, how much attention they direct toward it, and what meaning they attach to it. James understood this a century before the research caught up. He knew that pain and the experience of pain are not the same thing. Consider what he called the will to believe, the idea that our mental posture toward a situation actively shapes the situation itself. Applied to pain, this is not a dismissal of suffering. James was far too honest a thinker for that. He had struggled with deep depression and physical illness for years, and he knew what it felt like to be flattened by suffering. What he argued was something subtler, that within suffering, there is always a margin of choice. Not a choice about whether to feel pain, but a choice about how to orient oneself toward it. In the Varieties of Religious Experience, James described what he called the twice-born soul, those individuals who had passed through darkness and come out the other side transformed. These were not people who had avoided suffering. They were people who had gone all the way through it. And what they discovered, James noted, was a kind of resilience that could never have been built any other way. The will to endure, tested and proven against real pain, becomes something solid, something you can stand on. This insight has direct application today. Psychologists working in pain management have found that acceptance-based approaches, teaching patients to acknowledge pain rather than fight it, significantly reduce subjective suffering. The battle against pain often intensifies it. The willingness to endure, to stay present with the sensation without catastrophizing, opens up space that resistance closes. James would have recognized this immediately. He wrote that the secret of endurance was not the suppression of feeling but its transformation through attention and meaning. Psychological pain follows the same logic. James understood grief, anxiety, and depression not as failures of character but as genuine features of a rich inner life pushed past its current limits. He wrote compassionately about those who felt crushed by existence, the sick souls, he called them, and he never suggested that positive thinking alone could fix a broken heart. What he offered instead was a kind of philosophical companionship, the assurance that darkness is not the final word, and that the human mind contains resources it does not know it has until it needs them. One of the most powerful of those resources is meaning. James was drawn throughout his career to the question of what makes suffering bearable, and his answer was consistent. Suffering becomes bearable when it serves something larger than itself. The athlete who trains through pain is not simply tolerating it, they are converting it into excellence. The parent who sacrifices sleep and comfort for a newborn is not simply enduring, they are building love in its most concrete form. The person who walks through grief without denying it often emerges with a depth of empathy they did not have before. Meaning does not eliminate pain, but it changes what pain is for. James also warned against a culture that pathologizes all discomfort. In his essay, The Energies of Men, he argued that most of us live far below our actual capacity because we stop at the first signs of fatigue or difficulty. We treat every ache as a signal to retreat. But there is a second wind, he insisted, a deeper layer of energy and endurance that only becomes available when we push through the first wall of resistance. Pain, in this sense, is sometimes a doorway rather than a dead end. Of course, this is not permission to ignore genuine warning signals. James was a trained physician and respected the wisdom of the body. But he distinguished between pain that signals damage and pain that signals growth, and he believed modern people were increasingly confused between the two, retreating from the latter when what was needed was courage. The invitation James extends to us is not masochism. It is something closer to honesty. Acknowledge the pain. Sit with it. Ask what it is trying to tell you. Consider what you can make of it. And trust, not naively, but based on evidence, that the human organism is more resilient than it appears in the worst moments. Pain will come. That is not a threat. It is simply the nature of a life fully lived. What James offers is the conviction that we are not passive recipients of our suffering. We are its interpreters, and interpretation is a form of power. Subscribe to The Psychology of William James to explore more of his timeless ideas.